In the mid-1800s, America was expanding fast, but traveling across it was a nightmare. From New York to California by wagon, families bumped across deserts, mountains, and endless plains. The trip could take 6 long months, with cholera, broken wagon wheels, and bandits lurking on every trail. By sea, the alternative was hardly better. A 13,000-mile voyage around South America's Cape Horn, where storms capsized ships and weeks of cramped conditions spread disease. Some dared to cut across Panama, hauling luggage by mule and dodging tropical fevers. For fortune seekers chasing California gold, for families hoping for farmland, for traders seeking new markets, every route was slow, risky, and exhausting. And so, a new generation of dreamers began to ask, what if rails of iron could tie this restless nation together? Even as the Civil War divided North and South, President Abraham Lincoln looked westward. He believed a railroad would unite the fractured nation and help settle the frontier. In 1862, he signed the Pacific Railway Act, granting millions of acres of land and generous government loans to build it. The more track laid, the more land and money awarded. Two rival companies accepted the challenge. The Union Pacific Railroad would start in Omaha, Nebraska, pushing westward across the plains. The Central Pacific Railroad would begin in Sacramento, California, battling eastward into the mountains. Rivalry was encouraged. Each mile meant profit, and newspapers followed the contest closely. But between them stretched deserts, rivers, and mountain ranges no railroad had ever dared cross. The race to build America's first transcontinental railroad had officially begun. At first glance, the Union Pacific seemed to have the easier path, endless flat plains stretching west. But easy was deceptive. The plains had few trees, meaning lumber, for ties had to be shipped in at enormous cost. Sweltering summers baked the land, and in winter, blizzards buried entire camps. Central Pacific had the opposite problem. Just outside Sacramento rose the Sierra Nevada mountains, walls of granite thousands of feet high. Supplies for both railroads also posed a nightmare. Union Pacific struggled to move goods over muddy rivers, while Central Pacific had to haul everything by ship before it could even reach California. The race was less about speed and more about survival. Nature, distance, and exhaustion tested both sides. Still, mile by mile, the tracks crept forward into the unknown. Union Pacific's crews were made up of Irish immigrants and hardened Civil War veterans. Swinging heavy hammers, they drove iron spikes under blistering sun and icy wind. But the plains were far from safe. Native tribes, seeing their lands cut apart, resisted fiercely. Raids tore down telegraph lines, supply wagons were attacked, and workers often lived in fear of sudden ambush. Even without raids, progress was punishing. Mosquitoes swarmed in summer, spreading sickness. Winter storms froze men in their tents. Supplies like timber, nails, and rails had to be dragged for miles by wagon. Work camps sprang up almost overnight, some peaceful, others filled with saloons, gambling tents, and chaos. Yet, despite danger and hardship, the Union Pacific inched steadily westward, pushing rails across the Missouri River and into the open plains. For the Central Pacific, progress was measured in inches, not miles. The Sierra Nevada mountains loomed as an almost impossible obstacle. To carve tunnels through solid granite, workers drilled holes by hand with hammers and chisels, filling them with black powder. Later came nitroglycerin, so unstable that bottles could explode if dropped. Workers dangled in rope baskets over cliffs, setting charges as snow swirled around them. Winters were brutal. Avalanches wiped out entire camps. Snowdrifts piled so high they buried locomotives. In one terrible season, crews shoveled through over 40 feet of snow, just to keep work alive. Dozens died from blasts, storms, and exhaustion. Yet inch by inch, the Central Pacific pressed forward, blasting tunnels and laying rails until the granite wall of the Sierra Nevada slowly began to open. Behind the steel and engines were people. The Union Pacific relied on Irish immigrants, tough men who had fled famine back home. They swung sledgehammers in freezing cold and scorching heat, often battling exhaustion and injury. Central Pacific turned to Chinese laborers, over 12,000 of them. At first, many doubted they could endure such brutal work, but they quickly proved themselves unmatched in skill and stamina. They blasted tunnels, hauled timber, built bridges, and organized camps with discipline. Their healthier diets and boiled tea kept them stronger, and they often outlived other workers. Many risked their lives lowering themselves in bamboo baskets to set explosives on cliffsides. Though they were paid less and faced prejudice, their courage and efficiency became legendary. Without these Irish and Chinese laborers, the railroad could never have been built. As the tracks drew closer, competition turned fierce. Each mile meant more money, and each company wanted bragging rights. Union Pacific boasted record days, sometimes laying more than 5 miles of track in a single push. Central Pacific answered with one of the greatest feats in railroad history. In April 1869, over 8,000 workers laid 10 miles of track in a single day, a record that stood for more than a century. Teams worked in rhythm, hammers clanging like a great machine, rails sliding into place almost seamlessly. Newspapers across the country marveled at the pace, but speed came at a cost. Workers collapsed from exhaustion, accidents spiked, and tempers flared in camps. Still, the race pushed both sides harder, driving the iron rails ever closer together across the continent. After 7 grueling years, the two railroads finally met at Promontory Summit, Utah. On May 10, 1869, the great race ended in celebration. Locomotives from each side rolled forward, nose to nose, as officials, workers, and citizens gathered around. A polished spike of gold was placed in the final tie, symbolizing unity. 4 ceremonial spikes, gold, silver, and iron, marked the occasion. At the strike of the hammer, telegraph wires carried a single word across the nation: done. In cities from New York to San Francisco, bells rang, cannons fired, and crowds cheered. For the first time in history, America was bound together by steel. The moment wasn't just an ending. It was the beginning of a new era where coast-to-coast travel became possible in a single week. The Transcontinental Railroad transformed daily life. A journey that once took half a year could now be made in just 7 days. Farmers could send crops to distant markets before they spoiled. Mail crossed the country in record time. Soldiers could reach remote forts in days instead of months. Settlers poured westward, filling towns almost overnight. But the transformation carried a price. Native tribes were forced from ancestral lands. Bison herds, once numbering in the millions, were slaughtered to clear the way for tracks. Boom towns rose and fell with chaos. Gambling halls and saloons flourished one month, only to vanish the next. For many, the railroad was progress. For others, it was destruction. It carried both promise and pain, forever changing the face of the American West. In the end, the race to build the Transcontinental Railroad was more than a competition. It was a triumph of vision, grit, and immigrant strength. Irish and Chinese laborers, engineers, soldiers, and dreamers stitched together a young, restless nation. The railroad became the spine of America, carrying not just goods and people, but ideas, hope, and opportunity. It inspired future megaprojects, canals, highways, and bridges. And it showed what could be done when determination met technology. From sea to shining sea, A whistle now echoed across the land, announcing a new chapter in history. The golden spike at Promontory Summit was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of a united America, forever changed by the railroad that tied a continent together.